Hi everyone, One Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for our final installment of List Week, where I go over what I felt were the 50 best albums of 2017. We're going to kind of roll through the first 25 in this list and then go deeper into detail once I get into the higher echelon picks. I had to redraft this list again and again and again and again, and finally I think I'm happy with the results. So let's do it. Kicking things off at number 50, shout out to Sinjin Hawk with the very excellent and trappy and forward-thinking electronic music album First Opus. At number 49, Death from Above with what I feel is their real comeback album, Outrage Is Now. At number 48, Dying Fetus with Wrong One to Fuck With, brutal death metal album of the year in my opinion. At number 47 and 46, we have Pallbearer with Heartless and Sampha with Process. At number 45, it's Kung Fu Kenny with Damn, What Happens on Earth Stays on Earth. And at number 44, metalcore heavy hitters Converge play to their strengths on the album The Dusk in Us. At number 43, it is Elder with Reflections of a Floating World, one of the most epic metal records of the year with doom-sized heaviness and lots of progressive song structures. At number 42, it is Run the Jewels with RTJ3, which makes it onto this list because it came out super late in 2016 to the point where it missed that list week, so it lands here. And at 41, we have one of the spacier and more experimental and progressive alternative R&B records out there this year, Guerilla with Take Me Apart. At 40, it is Rhapsody with Lila's Wisdom, and 39, Feist with Pleasure. At 38, Code Orange with Forever, and 37, it is Joey Badass with All-Amerikkkan Badass. At 36, it is Fleet Foxes. They return with their first album in a while, Crack Up, beautiful little folk record. And at 35, Alvvays with Antisocialites, one of the catchiest and prettiest little dream and indie pop records of the year. At number 34, probably my favorite grime album of the year, it's Wiley with Godfather. At number 33, an excellent post-punk release from Proto-Martyr, Relatives in Descent. And 32, Ariel Pink's new record dedicated to Bobby Jameson. At number 31, one of the most electrifying punk records of the year, one of the most electrifying punk records to come out of the UK in a while, and that is Idols with Brutalism. At number 30, New York Stand Up for Princess Nokia with the deluxe version of her 1992 project. Her and Rough Trade Records expanded this thing into one of the most interesting underground rap records of the year. At number 29, an inventive fusion of Afrobeat, funk music, post-punk, electronic music, and more. The new Ibibio Sound Machine album, Uyai. At number 28, we have one of the many records dropped by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard this year, Flying Microtonal Banana, the band's foray into microtonal tuning. At number 27, this record is one of my favorites of the year, but yeah, I just wanted more material from it. But what's on here is just insane and crazy. It has the gutsiness of like an X-Ray Specs album, but it's kind of quirky, funky, and electronic and off the wall like an XTC or a Devo record. I'm talking about the new Guerilla Toss project, GT Ultra. And at number 26, the conceptual and self-reflective and introspective new album from K.R.I.T, Being You Is Great, I Wish I Could Be You More Often. And now that we're in the top half of the list, let's go! At number 25, we have one of the noisiest, loudest, heaviest, ugliest, and most nihilistic albums of the year, a record that in a lot of ways reflects my attitude on 2017, the new Primitive Man album, Caustic. This is such an ugly, heavy, noise doom album. Love how hideous and brutal this record is. It just really grinds down my soul into a fine powder, which I then snort like cocaine. At number 24, Uncommon NASA continues to prove his salt as hip-hop's answer to Rod Serling with one of his darkest and most political and most conceptual albums yet, with Written at Night. Definitely an underground experimental hip-hop album that you want to listen to if that is your bag, along with the new Billy Woods album at 23, Known Unknowns. Billy Woods comes through with one of his heaviest, punchiest, most aggressive, and most consistent projects yet. You still kind of get his very shouty, almost spoken word style, very esoteric, dense, very opaque lyrics on this thing. A few of his best hooks too, great production, just all around a good, grimy East Coast hip-hop record. At number 22, Jay-Z gets personal, philosophical, and economical on his new project 444. Kind of lo-fi and very low-key production from No ID on this thing from front to back. Like Jay's rhymes on this thing, like the more, I guess, introspective and down-to-earth approach that he approaches this thing with generally. I'll say something I said in my review for this. This is the first true Sean Carter album. Not so much a Jay-Z album, but really a true exposure, kind of a pulling back the veil of Jay-Z the man. At number 21, John Darnielle and Company tribute goth culture and its rise and fall on the new Mountain Goats album Goths. Also a very interesting record in the Mountain Goats canon because this is the first project from the band that is completely without guitar. And that leads John and his band down some really interesting instrumental roads that I don't think they would have headed in otherwise. Of course, the lyrical and the narrative content of the record is very quality. A few sleepy songs that underwhelm me here and there, but all around a very good album and one of my favorite additions to the Mountain Goats discography in a while. At number 20, a crazy, punky, driving, psychedelic, and garagey album incorporating elements of experimental rock and krautrock too. I'm talking about the new OC's album, Orc. John Dwyer and Company come through with some amazing, electrifying performances, great production, good chemistry between everybody playing on this record. All around, just a very good rock album. At number 19, a really experimental and kind of archaic Old English influence, but still there's a very post-modern quality to the lo-fi noisy production and the layering of the instrumentation on this thing. It's an incredible and very just very unique folk record. I'm talking about the new Richard Dawson project, Peasant. If you like your folk music off the beaten path and a little on the freakier side, especially with a strong narrative element, you're going to want to listen to this. And Richard Dawson, he's also no slouch when it comes to an eccentric vocal, so do anticipate that. At number 18, Sharon Jones and the Dap Kings with Soul of a Woman, a very tight, a very well written and performed and produced, and very consistent soul record, and an amazing final chapter to one of the best bands to kind of carry the torch for this sound into this decade. At number 17, we effectively hear Open Mike Eagle digging through his past on Brick Body Kids Still Daydream, going back to his stomping grounds, living in a project in Chicago, and kind of waxing poetic on the destruction, the demolishment of that project and sort of what it meant to him, the community he came from. Open Mike reflects on memories, gentrification in general. It is one of his most low-key albums, not quite as peppy or as instantaneously memorable as like dark comedy. However, what sort of intrigued me and kind of was an effective swap out for that was just how incredibly revealing the album is of Open Mike Eagle as a person. At number 16, this record really kind of grew on me this year. Though I did like it when I initially reviewed it. I was very much on the cusp of adding it to my loved list, but I thought maybe it was a little inconsistent and didn't quite stick the landing. However, the more I listened to it, the more impressed I was with it, and the more I came to realize it really truly is one of the best R&B records of the year, and it really truly is actually one of the better ones of the decade too. I had to give it to SZA with the album Control. Split apart, a lot of these songs boil down much of the time to tracks where SZA is almost like the side chick or the other woman. And a lot of these tracks stand very well on their own, but when you actually take all these cuts together in a wider scope as an album, you kind of get a story of a girl who kind of starts at that point, but then eventually kind of learns her lessons, grows as a person, gets more self-confident, kind of goes from girl to a more kind of womanly protagonist, depending less on the validation of others, specifically her lovers, to kind of get where she wants to be and feel good about herself. Production is good. Features are very good, and honestly, I'm looking forward to hearing SZA grow more as an artist into the future. Because considering how underwhelmed I was by that Z project way back when, I feel like she's truly come a long way. At number 15, one of the most enigmatic, I've said this again and again, but I'll say it one more time, one of the most enigmatic electronic music producers out there right now, amazing new artist on Brainfeeder, cannot wait to see how bright this kid's future is. Iglooghost with Neō Wax Bloom, very jittery, dense, mind-bending, from a totally friggin' different dimension this album is. I'll just keep talking if I allow myself to keep talking. Just check it out. At number 14, shout out to Tyler, the Creator, for really kind of improving all fronts on the record Flower Boy. Not only are we getting more interesting lyrics this time around, seems like Tyler has matured as a person. He's rapping better. He's really improved on his rap skills. He's truly improved on his production skills. He's brought on some great collaborators on this thing too. Just really impressed with the jazzy, beautiful, soulful direction of this album, and the bangers on here hit hard too. Just really like the flow and progression of this record as well. All around, again, improvements everywhere for Tyler, the Creator. Did not think I would enjoy a Tyler album this much since Bastard, but here we are. At number 13, it is Shoo Shoo with Forget, with one of the noisiest, most abrasive, and unsettling, and freaky art pop albums the group has dropped in a while. In a lot of ways, they kind of go back to their roots on this record a little bit, but in others, like, this is a whole new level of weirdness and distortion. Jamie Stewart's vocals are just as chilling and strange as ever, and I also can't really complain about a lot of the very dark, subversive, and sexual themes playing out in the lyrics on this thing. Shoo Shoo just continues to be one of those indie veteran projects that continues to stay interesting, continues to push forward, continues to experiment, and I'm looking forward to seeing that boundary pushed even further in the future. At number 12, one of my new favorite Australian artists this year, Alex Cameron with the album Forced Witness. Alex delivers a bunch of weird, glitzy, hilarious, like soft rock tunes and synth pop tunes. Many of the lyrics on this thing boil down to a character portrait of a very creepy individual who, like a bit of a horn dog, a total male chauvinist who just like thinks the world of himself, I guess. And the character kind of turns out to be like a bit of a lovable or likable asshole in a lot of ways, I guess. And not only is the album's selling point this character portrait, but also just the amazing hooks, the catchy lyrics, the sensual and soaring melodies all over this thing. This has been one of the most addictive tapes I've listened to this year. Just really could not get my ears off of it when I initially listened to it, and still it's even hard today, especially when I have other stuff that I need to be listening to and doing. So, you know, if you want an addictive, weird, little tongue-in-cheek pop record, give this thing a shot. At number 11, an experimental rock record that took a while to kind of warm up on me, but when it eventually did, it just continues to impress me to no end with its very eccentric vocal performances, with its lush arranged instrumentation, with its clean and amazingly produced bass rock instrumentation. I'm talking about the new Oxbow album, the Thin Black Duke, or rather just Thin Black Duke. Just really love the poetic lyrics on this thing, loving the tortured and very moody vibe of this album. This record has a vibe that very few rock albums do. It's very mystical, it's very strange. There's certainly a sense of wonder to the album, in my opinion. And here we are, in the top 10. Let's do it! Number 10! Gotta give it to Mike for the new Perfume Genius album, No Shape. Not only does this record contain some of Perfume Genius's most well-written, catchiest, and versatile material to date, but also, if there's one simple reason to put this record in this spot, if there's one reason to put this record in this spot, it is beautifully produced and arranged. Like, the instrumentation on this thing, there's so much diversity across the length of the entire record, and every sound is so gorgeous, is so luscious, is so vivid. There are moments of just soul-crushing heaviness on this album, and then there are moments of just like beautiful, breezy, airy, very refined sounds as well. Just thoroughly impressed with the instrumentation on this record. It provides an amazing foundation for, again, I'll say, some of Mike's best songs to date. So there we go. At number 9, a revolutionary record, in my opinion, the new Algiers record, The Underside of Power, an album that I just cannot get away from. Not only am I in love with the performances on this thing, the production is amazing, but again, I've said this before, I'll say it again, there are so few groups out there that, to me, sit at the musical cross-section that Algiers does. I mean, if any other groups, the influences of soul and blues and post-punk and goth rock and punk music. Add to that the political element in the band's music as well. There are very few groups out there that, to me, kind of embody the time that they come from, embody the time that they exist within, better than Algiers does. I think generally everywhere there is a certain certain level of unhappiness and unrest with the current state of things, and I feel like Algiers kind of channel that in a way very few groups do. And another amazing thing about this record, just the versatility across this album. Tracks that feel like a wonderful fusion of very dark rock and soul. Tracks that feel like weird, synthy, experimental, drony odysseys. Tracks that feel bluesier and smoother. Tracks that are like driving, heavy, hard-hitting synth punk. This record really is all over the place. However, it's the band's kind of eerie atmosphere, their dark, despondent, almost apocalyptic tone that really ties it all together really well into this fantastic package. Wish the album art was a little more interesting, though. At number 8, this record was reviewed very late in the year for me and was kind of a dark horse that I just stumbled upon looking for some records off the beaten path that I had not covered that I might be interested in covering. I'm talking about the album Los Angeles from Rosalía. Rosalía is a Spanish folk singer who teams up with a fantastic producer and guitarist on this album to pull apart and celebrate the Spanish folk and flamenco music tradition by just kind of rehashing and re-envisioning and rewriting and repurposing so many of these older songs from years and years and years ago into this new set of folk tunes that are amazingly performed. If there's one reason to put this record this high on this list, it is Rosalía's vocal ability. She is a vocal powerhouse, a vocal stunner, and that is the case from the beginning to the end of this project. Her range, her volume, her passion, it really is kind of enough to get me all teared up. And even though this record is pretty much just Spanish guitar and Rosalía's voice, it's a very versatile album that sort of pulls at my emotions in different directions, and I just love how slightly blemished and untouched this project is. Like, the performances on this thing are so raw, are so intimate. It's almost like I'm just listening to a live record in a lot of ways. And what Rosalía has done on this record is just so beautiful. It doesn't really need to be doctored up. It doesn't really need to be touched up all that much. Like, it's just kind of special and electrifying, again, organically in the raw on its own. To me, she's one of the most interesting voices in folk music at the moment, and I'm just looking forward and excited to hear what she's going to do next. At number 7, another one of my favorite Australian artists at the moment. This is an amazing pop record, guys. Like, he really kind of made a fantastic transition here into a poppier, glitzier, glammier record, a glammier sound. That is Kieran J. Callanan with the record Bravado. Such a display of pop prowess on this thing, and the tracks on this thing really run the gamut, from freaky, punky, experimental rock moments like She Loves to Hang, to inspiring and heavy and passionate and soaring and hard-hitting pop anthems that sort of introduce these driving EDM-style house beats. Like, this record has a little bit of everything, and I love it. And Kieran just kind of leads the whole bandwagon of pop triumph with this truly eccentric and strange personality that in a lot of ways feels like a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek parody of this vision he had in his head, or just like, I don't know, like the most overdone characteristics of masculinity itself. In one breath, what Kieran is doing in his music feels almost like a parody, but then in another, the songwriting, the execution, just everything else about his music is so incredible and so special that you can't help but just take it all super seriously. Kieran is an artist that I was a little late to. Somebody, when I went down to Australia to do a speaking engagement tour, handed me a copy of his last album, Embracism. I was really impressed with it, and I knew from there, like, next time this dude drops an album, I have to listen to it, I have to find it no matter what, because I know it's going to be special, and I'm glad that ended up being the case. I really am. My number 6 spot may make some people groan. I'll admit that. However, it is an important album to me. It is a significant album to me. It's an album from Neil Cicerega, mashup master, with his latest project here, Mouth Moods. Sure, Neil Cicerega may be greatly influenced by meme culture. There's really no denying that at this point. Out of all the mashup music that I've been listening to over the course of my life, and I've been listening to a lot, like, I was there when Danger Mouse was getting cease and desists over doing the Grey album. I was there when Girl Talk was like the hottest, coolest, most interesting thing on the planet. I've interviewed Steinsky. Like, I've observed a lot of mashups over the years. But in my opinion, Neō just takes a different, a refreshing, and a very inventive approach to kind of melodically repurposing one song, making it map and match over another. He just kind of brings together these musical worlds that one would never think would fit together. And in a lot of ways, the unforeseen and the unintentional genius of his work is just to kind of show that just how small artistically, or I guess structurally, compositionally, the world of popular music is. That he can essentially just grab these random, seemingly random pieces of it and have them collide in a way where it just coalesces so beautifully, so smoothly, and so sensibly. And sure, there are plenty of jokes and laughs and gags and everything on this record, but there are a lot of moments on this thing, collisions of songs and pieces of music that I genuinely love and enjoy, that I'm actually in awe of, and mashups that actually make me see the 2, 3, 4, however many pieces of music and samples are coming together on one single track in a completely different light, actually kind of recontextualizes the song itself for me, and I can't go back and listen to the song in the same way because I just kind of see it from a different angle now. So this record in a lot of ways has kind of altered my general opinions and my views on pop music and mashups in general, and I feel like, yeah, even though there are a lot of jokes and there's a lot of silliness to be had on the record, it's certainly something special I think Neō is doing, whether listeners understand it or not, or even whether Neō understands it or not. At number 5, one of the longest albums and longest album titles in the list here, Sunkill Moon's Common as Light and Love Are Red Valleys of Blood. Mark Kozelek, the main brain of Sunkill Moon, is marking at his most Kozelek on this album, I guess you could say. On this thing, you essentially get 2 hours of very lengthy, very linear, experimental rock and folk tunes that have a strong narrative element to them. Mark is telling tales. He is rambling. He is going into every minute detail of whatever topic he has set as the subject for a particular song. But in my opinion, Mark writes some of his most and tells some of his most compelling songs and stories that he has dropped since Benji. And sure, while this album may not be as tuneful as that record or many other triumphs in Mark's discography, the instrumentation at a lot of points rocks a little harder, delivers a harder, heavier groove. It's almost like I'm listening to Mark Kozelek be subconsciously influenced by the work of The Fall or something. But I think the cherry on top is just hearing Mark deliver these interesting narratives across the record, some of which are greater and more social and more political, some of which are very personal. Moments where he's tributing in song a friend who passed away and just kind of describing who this person was as a person, what made that person so special in the eyes of so many people who he knew, talking about interacting with fans, talking about vague rock songs and kind of lampooning contemporary music in general. One track where Mark is going into detail about his thoughts about the Pulse nightclub shooting. It is a very long, dense album that is difficult to sort of work through, and I'll admit, I don't always have the time to listen to this record from beginning to end. But for me, the appeal and beauty of this album really has nothing to do with convenience or ease of use. It's really kind of like a great series of short stories, like a collection of short stories in a book. And I think it's just an interesting moment in Mark's progression and career. Now, keep in mind, this is one of many, many, many albums Mark Kozelek has released in this year under different collaborations. So Mark Kozelek has had a really prolific year, and for him to, in a way, kind of kick things off with such a huge, fantastic record, in my opinion, has been really good, even if everything to come after it hasn't been quite as up to snuff. Hardcore Mark Kozelek fans have had a lot to celebrate this year, and this album is certainly one of those things. At number 4, we have a double album from the king remembered in time himself, Mr. Big K.R.I.T, with Forever Is a Mighty Long Time. I definitely commend him for keeping it up with the forever sort of mention or mantra going on in his album titles. I do like that a lot. But this dude really kind of outdid himself this time. At a point in time in his career where I thought that we had pretty much heard the last of interesting music from Big K.R.I.T. Not that I felt like he completely fell off, but with releasing so much music in such a short span of time without allowing himself that opportunity to kind of grow, experiment, and get out of his creative bubble a little bit, I feel like we were kind of hearing Big K.R.I.T. paint himself into a corner. But now that he sort of got off his label, he's back on his independent thing, he's doing things more on his terms, he really kind of came through with an excellent double disc album of Southern hip hop that is really all over the place. Like, man, he pulls off some incredible bangers on this thing, some great pop rap tunes, a few rap country fusions, a gospel number that's really incredible, a run of personal introspective tracks on the second disc that do really well, some great features, excellent beat switches on a few of these tracks too. And I just love that Big K.R.I.T. still comes through with this will to try different things, take risks, and he still just has this level of hunger that is inspiring, and you can really kind of feel it in his music too, especially on this album. Like, this to me is Big K.R.I.T. soaring. This is Big K.R.I.T. triumphing. This is Big K.R.I.T. just like really pulling out all the stops and just totally burning down everything and building it back up into this like amazing like castle. Just thoroughly impressed with what he accomplished on this thing, hoping to see him push forward even more with another album at some point in the future. It's kind of sad that there are some people who are unfortunately sleeping on this thing a little bit and don't seem to be quite as aware of Big K.R.I.T.'s existence now that he's not sort of getting that Def Jam push that he used to. But, you know, make no mistake, this is one of the best hip-hop records of the year, hands down. At number 3, also a very powerful record, we have the new Mount Eerie album, A Crow Looked at Me. I've done a pretty in-depth review of this record, and the backstory of this album isn't exactly obscure at this point, and it's not anything I want to sort of pull apart once again in this video. I just ask that, you know, if you are curious, just look it up yourself. But the story of death and dying, losing a loved one that is close to you, is not a story and not a narrative that is completely new in music. However, this album just kind of brings it up in this vivid, sort of high definition reality to the point where it's almost hard to stomach. It's almost hard to kind of look it straight in the face. The musical style is a little meditative. The instrumentation, the folk instrumentation, is very rough around the edges, as to be expected with a Mount Eerie production from a Phil Elverum production. But I do like the instrumental vibe of this record. It kind of goes back to one of my favorite Mount Eerie releases, Dawn. So it's kind of like this somewhat, I guess, loose folk instrumentation set to poetry. And the poetry, the words that Phil pulls together on this record about the loss of his wife to cancer are just really hard, really tough. And I don't know, there just have been very few records this year that have sort of shaken me emotionally to my core in the way that this album has. And as difficult as this album is to wrestle with in some respects, I do think it is a beautiful album. I do think it is one of Phil's most inspired and well put together albums, despite the fact that, you know, obviously this topic, this subject matter, was very difficult for him to sort of approach in the way that he did on this record. All I can say past this point is, you know, I hope people continue to support Phil and Mount Eerie through this time. I hope he's doing well. I hope he's healing. I hope he's doing better. I hope his, you know, family is doing okay. And just looking forward to, I guess, hearing more music from him, and looking forward to kind of seeing him, you know, continue to grow, and again, I'll say heal, and just survive. At number 2, this group completely just shook things up in rap this year with 3 fantastic records, one after the next. Of course, I'm talking about Brockhampton with Saturation 1, 2, and 3. I was kind of debating on whether or not I would sort of separate them and have them at different points in the list, but honestly, now that I've heard all 3 of them, and they're so close together in terms of quality and consistently, and I feel like the power and the statement of all of them is amplified by having heard all three. I just couldn't separate them. So they're all in the number 2 spot here. Brockhampton, West Coast-based boy band featuring guys like Kevin Abstract, Don McLennan, Merlin Wood, Amir Van, Matt Champion, Jorba, Bareface. The gang's all here. The gang's all here. These guys really killed it this year, man. Like, they came out with so much great music, so much essential hardcore hip-hop, pop rap. They just really kind of run the whole gamut, man. Sonically, stylistically, and they have such great chemistry and energy together when they're all rapping on a track. Such eccentric, kooky, colorful production, such great personality coming out of this thing, with each member sort of having their own voice, their own direction, their own lyrical style. It's been a long time, and I mean a long time, since we've heard a collective that has kind of gelled together this well. And yeah, it may seem very recent that we kind of went through a click phase in hip-hop where, you know, you had your Pro Era and your MMG and your Good Music and your Odd Future, but none of those groups really kind of came together cohesively as a unit, as Brockhampton has on these 3 records. And it seems like the longer they stay together, the more music they put out together, the more risks they're taking, the more that they are learning to kind of create as a collective and push forward as a collective. And I'm just really excited to see what the future holds for these guys. I mean, if there's one artist or one group that I am excited the most for the future of, it's Brockhampton right now. I'm most excited for Brockhampton. The most. And my number 1 record of 2017 is an album that, in my opinion, is 2017 through and through. And that has to be the new Father John Misty album, Pure Comedy. Father John Misty, in my opinion, came together with an album that is not going to be for everybody, and that's totally fine. My feelings for putting this record at the number 1 spot are very personal, although all my picks on this list are personal. But given the state of 2017, I feel like I needed a pure comedy. I needed an album that sort of pulled apart just a lot of the reasons why things are so shit. Not just simply commenting on the surface level of that or the symptoms of that, but getting down to a lot of what makes humanity so broken as a species. But also addressing topics that manifest themselves in interesting ways in the internet age, such as narcissism, humanity's ego, and then toward the back end of the project, Josh Tillman goes as far as to almost like predict humanity's demise at its own hand. And while a lot of people find this record very sad, very depressing, very dreary, and very long-winded, do keep in mind the title of this record is very intentional. There is certainly an element of very real, dark, and deadpan and somewhat ironic humor to the way that Josh approaches these topics on this record. And that is very much a brand of humor, a humor style that I subscribe to myself. I feel like sometimes the world is so messed up, is so dark, is so horrifying that you really can't do anything but laugh at it. And I feel like in some respects this album does that very well. And there's also the musical style of this album. This is not the folky and romantic and luscious and intoxicating sound that you may remember from Father John Misty. Instead, Josh comes through with a much colder and a much more theatrical base of instrumentation this time around. And that's one thing, as I've listened to this album more and more, I've come to appreciate about it. There's like a real sense of musical theater and drama to a lot of these narratives and a lot of these songs. It's like I'm listening to a lot of the characters Josh is singing about on this record play these scenarios out on a stage. And like any good play or satire on the problems of the present, Josh kind of takes a lot of the modern day issues that we're dealing with and pushes them to an extreme, rolls the clock back a certain amount of time into the future so that we've just entered dystopia. And I love it when an artist can kind of pull that off really effectively, whether it be in music, in movies, in video games, wherever the medium may be. I don't think this album is going to be for everybody, I'll say that again, but it certainly is for me, and again, I feel like this record really does embody 2017 and all its faults. And those are my favorite albums of the year, guys. Thanks for watching. Let me know down in the comments what some of your favorite albums of the year were, and I will see you guys very soon in another video. Love you, love you. Transition. Did you give this list a listen? But what'd you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Hope you're doing well. Let me know down in the comments what your favorite albums of the year were. And also next to my head is another List Week video and a link to our website where you can actually check out some year-end lists from Needle Drop contributors Jeremy and Austin. Contributors, Jeremy and Austin. All right, that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. List Week has been a good time. I'll see you in the next video forever.